Hi guys, and welcome back to another video. So for today's little sketchbook doodling session, I did not really have like a plan for what I exactly wanted to draw, but I think sometime last week I thought I was going to use alcohol markers, so I ended up putting down sticker paper already on this particular spread to protect the drawings for our next spread, as well as the ones that I did for last week, which happens to be these monochromatic sketches, which I did of By the Beat from Niji-san Gen. But let's move on to talk a little bit about what we are going to be doing today. So I was kind of digging around in some of my old like art supplies that I have laying around, and I stumbled upon these once again. So obviously I've used these pencils before on my channel and it's not really anything new, but I don't think I've really done a spread where I mostly use these particular pencils, which happens to be the Prismacolor Colerase, to do our main portion of our sketching. I've definitely used the Colerase for like transferring my lines from my digital sketch to a like watercolor sheet or a shikishi board or whatever. But you would have saw that I showed both the blue version and the red pencil as well. And then I also showed a few alcohol markers. So kind of like the idea is to sketch one side with the blue pencil and the other side with the red. And because I did end up putting some kind of marker paper down, I wanted to use alcohol markers somewhere in the spread, but I wasn't too gung-ho on doing like a full colored spread anyways, like of fully rendered versions of using like alcohol markers like I've done in the past. Plus, using alcohol markers on this particular marker paper works best if you work with flats, and oftentimes when I work with alcohol markers I like to do more of like blending and just utilizing a little bit of softer, I guess, like transitions if I can. But maybe in the future I can play around with doing more like cell shading style and keeping things more simplistic if I ever run into the issue of wanting to do more of like a full color spread and having to work on the marker paper. And what I mean by marker paper, I mean sticker paper. So basically in previous videos, wherever I have done like alcohol based marker videos in my sketchbook, this particular sketchbook is like more or less like a notebook, because that's what it's actually manufactured as, and I just use it as a sketchbook because it has like a plethora amount of like blank pages. So for myself, because the paper is so thin, whenever I have to use alcohol markers, there tends to be a lot of bleed through, and I would usually use like sticky notes or like any kind of scrap piece of paper to cover it up with other doodles, or just like try to block out any larger area so that the doodles on kind of like the bleed through can kind of stand out on their own. But I did more recently use kind of like a workaround where you can use matte kind of label paper, sticker paper, whatever you have access to. And a lot of them have like an adhesive backing, I guess, and it has like a coating that's more of like a plasticky-ish material, I guess, which isn't really porous, and it doesn't allow the ink to really seep through. So I use that to my advantage, and kind of, one, it's easy to stick into your sketchbook, but then two, you don't really have to worry about bleed through on either ends, which is great. So I like to do that in between different spreads if I want to have like a fresh start or a cleaner surface to work on for any of my spreads. So I basically rambled through the entirety of the left-hand side of the little blue sketches that we ended up doing. So kind of like when I was looking at the pencils that I had, which is the blue one for the Prismacolor Colerase, and then I have the, I think, Carmine red for the red color, which we are using for the right hand side. So I was thinking of like blue and red characters, or thinking like temperature wise what would work well for certain characters for me to draw in more of like a split kind of spread. But the first kind of pair or duo that I thought of was the Genshin characters Kaya and Diluc, because I feel like their personalities are very different. As well, it has like the temperature, so Kaya has like more towards ice, and then Diluc is more towards like fire or like pyro. So that's like where my brain went to first. But as soon as I started sketching out Kaya's little spread on the left hand side, I thought it would have been fun to do also like Reki and Longa as well. Reki is a little bit more of like the reddish orange because he has a lot of red, as well as like a deeper yellow. So orange could probably work for him too, or just like use red in general, and maybe we can use like yellow alcohol marker to accent his page. And then Longa has like a bit of blue, he has a lot of white and some like black as well. So I feel like they could also work. Obviously you could do maybe like Sonic and Shadow if you want to add black, or like Sonic and Knuckles. Who else is like a very popular red and blue, I guess? You guys can let me know if you have any other characters you think would have suit this color combination. Also, I was struggling to get these pencils to really sharpen up to a sharp point. So because I did not really have like a good idea of what I wanted to do for today's session. Oh, also I ended up adding a little bit of real-time footage here of me doing the cleaner lines and kind of like pushing the values and stuff, or like I guess like in this case it's like similar to the rendering process whenever I work with kind of like graphite or pencil or any kind of traditional medium. But the camera shakes quite a bit because I have the camera arm fixated to my current desk instead of like on a separate surface that doesn't really shake. So I thought it would be a little bit annoying to have it shake all the time, so the rest of the footage will be also in time lapse once again. But these pencils, typically if I'm working with like the red and blue, I do like using mechanical pencils in general when working with any type of like graphite or pencil type material. For me, it's just easier, then I don't have to like really focus on having to sharpen and have like a very sharp point to do finer details or really darkening up, or like, I don't know, anything that needs a little bit more refining. I definitely like having a sharper tip for any of my materials. But in this case, sharpening these types of pencils was a little bit of a pain. I don't know if it's the sharpener. Well, I know it's like at least 50% of the sharpener's fault that the lead keeps breaking. I usually have like a very small, I think it's a Staedtler brand pencil sharpener that I tend to like sharpen over a container so that I can keep all the pencil shavings on one little area, and it usually doesn't have too much of an issue sharpening any of my colored pencils or even the Prismacolor Colerase that I've used in the past whenever I needed to sharpen to transfer from one page to another. This one I kind of just found because, like I said, I packed a lot of my art supplies away because I'm moving my workspace to a different room or a space somewhere else. So I have a lot of things packed away and I did not have a sharpener on hand, and I was going to potentially just like use a box cutter and almost like whittle away some of the wood so that it exposes the lead and we can sharpen it that way, kind of like the old-fashioned way of sharpening pencils and getting it to a nice point for drafting. But I'm not too sure how many of you guys have actually used the Prismacolor Colerase and compare it to maybe like colored pencils or like a normal HB pencil. At least for me, I don't know if it's because I I scribble a lot when I'm adding value, and I don't know, maybe I'm pressing a little bit too hard for some of the areas. The lead goes really short super quickly, so it does have like a little bit more of that softer texture rather than something that's like a little bit harder, maybe like a, I don't know, like HB I guess in this case, because this might be similar to a 2B in my opinion, or maybe like a 3B in terms of softness. So I have to sharpen it quite often to get a nice sharp point, which helps me do like darker lines, thinner lines, and kind of like helps me refine drawings so that they appear a little bit more clearer. Because you can see that there are some times that I do pull out the Kneaded Eraser to blot out a few mistakes, but other than that, I do like sketching where I don't focus on erasing too much, so I end up just sketching as light as I can, get a rough amount of detail or like placement of things so that I know where I want things to be later on. And then once we are committed to certain lines, I will go ahead and like press harder with the pencil so that we can get a darker value, and then we can start scribbling in our values to kind of cover up some of my scribbly lines, my sketchier lines, I guess. But in terms of the drawings, I don't think I've drawn Kaya or Diluc like anytime recently other than like chibi versions of them, and I definitely miss drawing Kaya. He looks a little bit derpy in the rough sketch. I am going to fix up his face and I'm going to erase the kind of like chin to nose area because it kind of like became a little bit more short and too round, so I don't really like his face. I need to elongate his chin and kind of like jawline area a little bit more, and he'll appear a little bit less derpy. But for the most part, I like D-Luke's sketches compared to Kaya's, but I don't know why I ended up sketching on the right hand side and doing the rendering. So if you're kind of like me and you don't really plan out where you start to really go ham with adding values with a medium that might smudge or anything like that, try to keep another piece of paper underneath your hand if you can, and try your best not to shift it around. So I know some people get a little bit confused whether or not I use the piece of paper under my hand for like what reason. There's kind of like two reasons. So one is to prevent, or I guess like 2.5 reasons. Two of them are very much connected. So one is to prevent my hand from smudging the pencil underneath, and then the other is to keep my hand clean as well, so I don't have to worry about accidentally pressing graphite onto my hand and then accidentally transferring that to somewhere else, just to keep like things a little bit cleaner. But then the second reason is actually because I do get clammy hands at times. I don't know if it's like my body heat just like suddenly rises every so often. So when that happens, there is a little bit of like almost like stickiness. I don't know if that's too gross or like TMI, but I don't want to accidentally transfer any of that to my page either. In the past, like if you're using notebook paper or thinner paper, maybe like printer paper or something like that, if you have like a little bit of clamminess, moisture from your hand, and you leave it on the paper for a little bit too long, you can kind of like slightly warp the paper. Part of it might be like the heat from your hand as well, but I don't really want to accidentally cause a little bit like beveling and stuff, or just transferring oils from my hand to my paper if it's not really necessary. But the key is to not shuffle your paper around. I know some people have issues of the paper not really doing its job, and the reason being is like the paper is not really any different than your hand. So if you're sliding that sucker all the way across your paper, it's going to do the same thing as your hand. So keep your paper like still on top of your surface, and just move your hand kind of like by lifting it up and placing it down rather than like smoothing out the surface. I find that's like the easiest way to keep things clean. And if I'm sticking like spare pieces of paper within my sketchbook, oftentimes I try my best to make sure that they also don't shift around, and that's how I usually keep my papers clean for the most part if I have like several pages being sandwiched between graphite. But I think that's it about talking about paper and all that jazz, because I went on like a full tangent, but I did have fun just working on more monochromatic spreads, I guess, in this case. I know I mentioned that, and I showed at the beginning of the video, that I will be using alcohol markers to some extent on these kind of like spreads, but the only reason I wanted to do that was I was experimenting to see whether or not I could do like more of a monochromatic look, but the alcohol markers really kind of like rub out the graphite, so they kind of dissolve and mix together, and it makes it a little bit hard for me to see my lines after. So I decided that I wouldn't use it to place down any of my values for Kaya or D-Luke unless I was gonna do inking. But I was not really up to doing any inking today. It often cramps my hand a little bit more compared to just like looser sketching and all that. Even like when I'm doing more details, or in this case like the rendering part, whenever I use like graphite and pencil, it doesn't cramp my hand as much as working with like a fine liner or inking. I don't know if it's just the way that I grip my pencil. It does cause me a little bit more discomfort in my hand. I don't know. I don't really, but then again, I was gonna say when I write like letters or anything that has like a large amount of substantial text for the most part, and I'm writing it by hand, my hand does cramp a lot regardless if I'm using like a pencil or a pen. So maybe I do have more of a deft grip if I'm using a pen. Hopefully next week though, I will be kind of like back on track in terms of like different mediums for the sketchbook. Like I mentioned, because like things are packed away, I am a little bit limited on what's like available in my pencil cases. And even though I don't get sick of really using pencil or to doodle or sketch or anything like that. I don't want the videos to be all like pencil work. So hopefully today will be the kind of like a little bit of the last portion. Maybe I'll do one more session with like normal graphite, mechanical pencil-esque type of video. But I did monochromatic. I think, what did I use? I used the Pilot Color Eno. Oh, this dramatic pause here, I guess, is me trying to sharpen up this pencil. And you can see that for the last few times that I've sharpened this pencil, I actually kept shoving the lead back into the point of the pencil instead and just hoping it wouldn't fall out. But at this point, it was struggling a lot and I kept sharpening it. Maybe if I remember, I'll put a picture of the difference between the blue and the red and the state that they're in, because the blue whittled down quite a bit because of the breakage of the lead, unfortunately. I don't know if it's because I've accidentally dropped the box or like maybe it had a little bit of a rough time during transit. I bought these pencils like back in university. It's probably 10 years old at this point. I haven't used them all because they came in a pack of 12 each, I believe. So I am kind of like on my last 2 or 3 per set. And then maybe in the future I'll get like the multicolored ones. So like a pack of 12, but it has like 12 different colors. I was really into, for some reason, using blue and red exclusively when I was doodling in my sketchbook when I was back in my uni days. But I think that's also like another reason why I'm kind of doing these kinds of sessions for sketchbook doodling. I've been revisiting a lot of like the mediums that I enjoyed using when I used to sketch in my sketchbook a little bit more freely, and I almost sketched in my sketchbook almost like every day back in my uni times. But yeah, let's talk about the alcohol markers. I accidentally placed the pink on Kaya where it shouldn't have been, but for the most part, I ended up swapping the colors. So I gave kind of this lightish kind of mid-tone pink to Kaya to block in some of the shapes that were part of the negative space. And then for D-Luke, I decided to put the blue. I think these colors are a little bit more reminiscent of Rose Quartz and Serenity. I know I posted a short recently talking about like my favorite color combo, and I don't know if it's the lighting in my videos, but that one's more of like a cooler or almost like a greenish blue if you could put it on the spectrum, and then the pink that I was using is more closer to a peach. So it's not close to Rose Quartz and Serenity compared to this combination. So yeah, I don't know. There's something I like about the red and the blue, but also obviously I like the blue and the pink together too. But I think we are coming up to the end of our little session, and you can see that I did not go with like the super monochromatic look of giving blue to Kaya and then D-Luke with the kind of pinkish color instead. I decided to switch it so that we didn't have just like 2 individual spreads or like pages being completely separate. Also, you can kind of see the imprint of like Frio and Zeal on top of the sticker paper that I decided to put in between to keep my pages a little bit more clean. So good thing I did that, otherwise my pages would look a little bit too messy and I would lose that kind of like clean and crispness. This is kind of like where I'm at in my sketchbook currently. We're going a little bit slow, but I think as long as I'm chipping away at it, I will finish the sketchbook eventually. I'll talk to you guys next time in the next video. Bye!